Hello, welcome to a special Q&A recording of Limbo, one of the 50 official selection titles at the 45th Toronto International Film Festival. I'm Robin Citizen, the Senior Manager of Festival Programming, and I'm thrilled to be here with filmmaker Ben Sharrock and actor Amir El-Masry, who plays Omar in the film. Thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah. And Ben, you're calling from Scotland, and Amir, you're calling from London, correct?
I'm actually in San Sebastian in
San Sebastian.
Spain at the moment. Yeah.
So I just want to give a little recap of the film. Our viewers will have seen the film, but I just want to remind them that Limbo follows Omar from Syria and his encounters with his neighbors in this remote Scottish island, and the other asylum seekers that he lives with, Farhad, Abedi, and Wasef. So Ben, I would really like to start with you. I wonder if we could start by talking about where the idea for this film originated for you. So what is your connection to the stories of refugees from the parts of the world represented by the characters in this film?
Yeah, so it's really something that goes back a long way for me. So my undergraduate degree, which is now a long time ago, too long ago for me to remember. It started 13 years ago, was in Arabic and politics. And I spent my third year of that living in Syria. So this was just the year before the civil war started. And during my time there, I obviously made lots of friends. I played in a rugby team in Damascus, and we went on tour to Lebanon and all of these sorts of things. And I came back from my time in Syria, and then I started to specialize in Middle Eastern cinema. And I ended up writing my dissertation or my thesis on Arab and Muslim representations in cinema and TV, particularly in American cinema and TV. So that sort of like started a long time ago. And then after that, I went to film school, started trying to be a film director. And as part of that, with another project, spent some time with Arune, the producer, doing some work in a refugee camp in southern Algeria. And we were doing a project that was based quite specifically around the idea of identity and identity of refugees. That was for a short film project. Unfortunately, that fell through because it was a risk for us to make this film out there at that time. And then once everything started happening with Syria and we were kind of entering into the refugee crisis, I started to think about the representation of refugees that we were witnessing in mainstream media and in some filmic representations, but and it sort of worked against, I was started thinking about the friends that I had made in Syria, and then thinking about the depictions of these people that we were witnessing. And I felt that there was a gap there, and there was a process of dehumanization that was taking place. On one side, you had this sort of demonizing of refugees and asylum seekers, and then on the other side, you had the sort of stories or imagery that the sensationalized part of this that was kind of causing people to pity refugees, which is also dehumanizing. And I felt that there was this gap in the middle, that we weren't really looking at refugees in a way that kind of goes beyond the label of being that goes beyond the label of a refugee. So I kind of really wanted to write a film about this and look at this as a subject matter. And I think in that sense, it started out to something that was quite academic, and it took a long time for me to write it. I had, obviously, as an outsider, I had a very a different perspective and quite a particular perspective on this. And yeah, I basically went on this road to write this script. It was extremely difficult. It took me probably more than a year and a half to write it. And there was a huge amount of obviously research involved and speaking to people who had been through the asylum system. And then I ended up kind of looking at sort of two different realities. One of these realities is that there were groups of refugees that were being sent to Scottish Islands. But this is very different to this film because they already had refugee status because they were part of a refugee resettlement program. And then I was looking at the situation of what was going on in different parts of Europe, particularly in Germany and in Scandinavian countries, where asylum seekers were being sent to remote communities to wait for their asylum claims. And then sort of arrived at the idea of somewhere in between that of setting up this film of a group of asylum seekers sent to a remote Scottish island. So that's sort of the long story behind the start of making this film.
It's a fascinating journey, though. There's so much background and research involved in what ended up as this, really beautiful narrative on screen. Amir, so a lot of our viewers will recognize you from some of your recent work, including Star Wars: Rise of the Skywalker.
Indie little film.
Yeah. Little small, low budget work. So what attracted you to this role in this film?
I think it's the first time I've seen a story about the refugee crisis told with not only so much heart, but really gives a lot of ownership over those individuals. And it's a story about an oud player. But honestly, when I got the script from my agent, and I saw the little blurb, I was like, oh, okay, here we go. But when I read it, honestly, it was the first time I've ever laughed and cried at the same time from just off reading the script. It's a very unique, quirky, and offbeat style of storytelling. Something I've never really seen before on screen. And I'd seen Ben's film before, Picadero, and so stylistically, it really does stand out as his way of filmmaking. So yeah, I jumped on it straight away. I was like, I have to be part of this in some way. Yeah, again, it gives full ownership to those characters, which is something you rarely see. You see them as just solely the victim of those circumstances, but you don't see them as human beings, which is essential. So yeah.
And the comedy is really part of the humanization in this film, and it jumps out at you from the very first scene, which is, I think, an iconic scene, and its humor. It's hilarious. But kind of on that point, we see so many documentaries and narratives about the refugee crisis and immigration process, and so much of it is understandably quite serious and focused on the trauma of it. And Limbo really subverts that from the beginning. But were you ever nervous about that balance of comedy and drama? And how did you know this is an appropriate time for some levity, or was it just trial and error?
Yeah, no, of course. I mean, it's a really challenging subject matter to deal with in any way. So to add kind of humor into that mix, it was really difficult, and I think that's why, as well, the writing process took a long time, and we did a lot of things to work through that in terms of rehearsal process with Amir, with the actors, and then a long time in post-production as well, looking at these things, reviewing them, thinking how we can shift from the humor to the drama, and so it's very challenging. I think that it's something that sort of, fundamentally is something that I really believe in, that it's a really interesting way to look at serious subject matters and look at tragedy through humor and use that as a device. And I think that it's, I think one of the things with this film is that it had to, there's so much material on this. There's so many documentaries and literary work and then obviously all the sort of mainstream media things. So this film, to really work as a fiction film, it had to do something very different. It had to do something that would set it apart from all of the other things that cover that deal with this subject. And I think that from a sort of filmmaking perspective, it's the thing with as a subject, I'm a filmmaker, and this is something that's important to me. But if I was someone that could influence policy or a lawyer or whatever, I could be more useful to do something, to work in this area. As a filmmaker, you can only do so many things. But one of those things is attracting attention in a sensitive way, in an interesting way, in a careful way to the subject matter. So that's why it was also important to make a film that was unexpected within this context.
Right. And having fleshed out characters is so important in drawing people into the story so they understand kind of the wider issue at hand, right? Amir, we see you form these beautiful friendships with these other men, and I kind of want to talk about your process of working with these other actors. So in particular, Vikash Bhai, who plays Farhad, who you become very close to in the film. And it's a wonderful performance and just one of my favorite characters in films in the past few years. So can you talk about how do you form that rapport? It seems so authentic and rich.
Vikash and I were lucky that we actually worked together. We never did any scenes together, but we worked together on a different project a few years back. And so when it came to the chemistry reads, as soon as I had seen his name on the thing, I was like, yes, amazing. He brings such an incredible warmth in any room he goes into. So that wasn't difficult in terms of forming a friendship. I mean, we're very good friends off the back of that as well. So there wasn't a difficulty as such to kind of build a rapport. But adding layers to it and also having that responsibility of telling the story, we had a couple weeks rehearsal, and we met with people who'd done a similar route from Syria to Scotland, and so we always had that in the back of our minds, and that we were just we're making a film essentially, But yeah, no, it was honestly, as cliche as you've probably heard this millions of times, but working with such a small team, you feel like you're living with them constantly every day. So you feel so close to everybody. I mean, we were literally living next door for a month, So there was no escaping me, Ben. Basically, constantly. I was still constantly there.
To add to that, we really were on a remote Scottish island. So we shot the film on a remote Scottish island. The film had never been made there before. So we were all really stuck there together. And I think that
and no reception.
Yeah.
So no one could be using their phones,
Oh, what do you do? We're wrapping up in a little bit, but I do want to ask, because your first film, Picadero, as you mentioned, was so well received and garnered so much critical acclaim and success, what was the experience of making this film with that success already under your belt? Did you feel like you knew what you were doing, you were an old hand, or was there added pressure because of, coming out so strong right out the gate?
Oh, it's very, very complicated psychological experience. It was, Picadero was made, with a very low budget. So it was essentially self-funded. So, and it was made outside of the industry. So going into this film, which was formally backed by the UK industry, it was a very different experience. And I think that I sort of switched a lot of the time in my head from early on. I felt like, no, this is my second feature. And then gradually, as you go through the process, you realize that there's so many things that are different doing it in this way. That we did, we didn't have execs, we didn't have all of these different things, and all, it's a great part of the process having lots of these different people involved, but and it really helps. But it's very different to the experience with Picadero. And then, yeah, of course, I think it's that kind of thing of feeling like, you want to take a step forward as a filmmaker, take a step forward in your career, keep exploring your craft, not just do the same thing over and over again. So I think I kind of really thought a lot about what I wanted to carry forward from Picadero, what aspects of that film are sort of fundamental to kind of my style and my voice as a filmmaker, but then how I could sort of build on that and develop that with this film as well.
Well, you did it beautifully. You made a gorgeous film, and I can't wait to see what's next from both of you. I want to thank you to the audience for joining us, and remind them that as an organization still impacted by COVID, we need the support of our audiences so that we can continue to present films to future generations and preserve these diverse and important voices. This film is eligible for the People's Choice Award. Please vote for your favorite films at tiff.net/vote. Thanks again, Amir and Ben.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.